Welcome back to my channel. Today we are discussing the final day of Sir William Wallace, a Scottish knight who, in the late 13th century, led a fierce and successful rebellion against King Edward I of England. After a string of military victories, including the legendary Battle of Stirling Bridge, Wallace became a living symbol of Scottish independence. But what was life like for Wallace during his final day? How did he die? Let's find out. So, William Wallace was born in the village of Elderslie near Paisley in Renfrewshire, Scotland. And when he was young, he likely received some education at home in subjects such as reading, writing, and math. During this time in Scottish history, the country was ruled by King John Balliol, who had actually granted several Scottish nobles permission to marry and to have children. So when Balliol came under the thumb of the English king, Edward I, and was forced to flee Scotland, things went downhill from there, and by 1297, Edward I had asserted his dominance over much of Scotland. Although there were still many Scottish nobles who sought to restore independence, by this point, Edward called himself the Lord of the Isles and the Overlord of Scotland, and he even imposed heavy taxes on the Scottish people. Needless to say, they weren't thrilled about it. So in 1298, the tide started to turn when a group of Scottish nobles joined together, led by figures such as Andrew de Moray and William Wallace. They began guerrilla attacks against the English, targeting supply lines and smaller forces, and achieving important victories at places like the Bridge of Lunan and the Mercat Cross. But perhaps the greatest victory of the Scottish patriots came in September of 1297, at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, under the command of William Wallace and John de Warenne. The Scottish army used superior numbers and a clever tactical maneuver to defeat a larger English force. This battle established Wallace as a national hero and solidified Scotland's desire for freedom. However, the honeymoon didn't last long. Although Wallace had proven himself as a great warrior, he lacked political skills. And after King Edward I reasserted control over parts of Scotland in 1298, he went on to commit serious diplomatic errors. For instance, in 1299, he attacked the English town of Carlisle, but he also refused to make peace with the English king, choosing instead to fight on. By this point, Edward I was absolutely fed up with Wallace, and he set out to end the rebellion once and for all. He took to calling himself the Hammer of the Scots, and he implemented a scorched earth policy, burning villages and killing livestock until the countryside was devastated, and the Scottish people suffered horribly. Yet despite all of this, Wallace continued to resist, hiding in the rural parts of Scotland, launching guerrilla attacks whenever possible and managing to remain elusive to the English king. But this wouldn't last forever. In 1304, King Edward I managed to get a big win against the Scots at the Battle of Fazeless, which was a turning point in the war. Soon after, when Wallace was staying at the house of a Scottish nobleman named John de Loudon, he was betrayed by his host and arrested by the Sheriff of Ayrshire. He was then taken to meet with King Edward I, but when he refused to submit, he was imprisoned in the Tower of London, accused of high treason. Wallace remained defiant, refusing to plead guilty or even appear in court. His trial was nothing more than a formality, and he was already doomed. On August 23, 1305, he was taken to Smithfield, a public square in London, to be executed for his crimes against the English crown. He was charged with a litany of crimes, including high treason, murder, arson, and rape. These charges were common among those who went against the king, and Wallace was seen as a dangerous criminal who had led an insurrection and murdered loyal subjects. Most historians agree that he was innocent of these charges, however, and they were only used to paint him as a monster in the eyes of the public. Wallace was given every opportunity to save himself, but he refused to bend the knee to the king. His execution was one of the most brutal and humiliating punishments reserved for those convicted of high treason. In fact, according to some sources, he was the only person ever to suffer such a fate. If you aren't familiar with the details, here is how it went down. The execution began with the condemned being taken to the gallows, where they were hanged for several minutes. The goal of this part of the punishment was to break the person's will and bring them to the point of unconsciousness. The next step was drawing. This involved stripping the victim naked and tying them to a horse. The horse would then pull the victim along a set route, typically through the streets of a city. Throughout this process, the victim's entrails would be torn from their body, and if they were still alive, they would be burned before their very eyes. The third stage of the punishment was the removal of the heart and other internal organs. Finally, the condemned would be quartered, where their body would be cut into for pieces. The head was often severed at this point and displayed on a pike or hung from a tower. In Wallace's case, his head was placed on a pike on London Bridge, a grim reminder of the fate that awaited anyone who dared defy the king. His body parts were sent to for different parts of the kingdom: Newcastle, Berwick, Perth, and Stirling. The English hoped that by publicly displaying his remains, they would strike fear into the hearts of the Scottish people and discourage any further rebellion. But instead, the execution had the opposite effect. This whole process was a spectacle for a massive crowd. Men, women, and children gathered in the square to watch the entire ordeal. The English wanted to make sure that everyone understood the consequences of going against the crown. Throughout the process, Wallace remained steadfast and brave, showing no fear or remorse. Despite being a small man, only 5 feet tall, he commanded respect and admiration from all who witnessed his final moments. It's been said that when the executioner approached him with the sword to take his head, Wallace stood tall and told him to come at him from the front, so he wouldn't soil his shirt. When the axe seaman struck, it took to blows to end his life. As the crowd watched intently, Wallace's head was cut off and held aloft for all to see. His headless body was then dragged through the streets of London, a cruel and humiliating display that was meant to shame and degrade him. The sight of Wallace's battered and broken body left a lasting impression on all who saw it, a chilling reminder of the brutality of the regime. As the procession made its way through the city, the noise and jeers of the crowd reached a fever pitch. Many shouted insults and curses, reveling in the downfall of the Scottish hero. Others, though, were filled with admiration for his bravery and defiance. When his body was finally cut up, the crowd grew silent. The gruesome task was carried out with precision and care, ensuring that each piece was severed cleanly and precisely. The sight of Wallace's mutilated body was a disturbing spectacle that even the most hardened spectators found difficult to stomach. The execution of Sir William Wallace was a dark and shameful chapter in history. His death is remembered as a symbol of the brutality and ruthlessness of the English monarchy and the lengths to which they would go to maintain control over their subjects. Yet despite the horror of his final day, Wallace's legacy lives on. He is revered as a national hero, and his sacrifice continues to inspire generations of Scots. Far from crushing the spirit of rebellion, the execution of William Wallace only served to strengthen it. His death became a rallying cry for the Scottish people, and his memory a source of inspiration for future leaders, such as Robert the Bruce, who would eventually win Scotland's independence. The story of his final day is a testament to the courage of one man against an oppressive regime, and a reminder of the lengths to which power will go to maintain control. Now I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the execution of William Wallace? Do you think it was a necessary evil to put down a rebellion? Or do you think it was a brutal and inhumane punishment? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching.